Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sherman Hub meeting. It's a public meeting on the proposed waste gasification plant that is proposed for just a couple blocks north of this location. The meeting will begin shortly. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, folks. If you could find your way to a comfortable chair with a good view. No, this is about my height. It's working. Yeah. And I'm standing on a box, Bob. And if you could find your way to your chairs, we'll begin in about a minute's time. to get this down to my height. Good evening, folks, and thank you so much for coming out this evening to the proposed gasification plant information meeting. The meeting this evening is sponsored by the Sherman Hub, and those are a group of your neighbors and residents in the neighborhood who have come together and put this on so that our neighborhood can learn more about this proposed facility. And we'd like to thank the good folks at 270 Sherman North, and whose amazing and beautiful facilities were able to have this meeting this evening. And as you can see, there's some different sets here. This is often used for movie shoots, and originally started as a cotton factory. So there's a lot of interesting history in this location. And we'd like to thank our guests that are here this evening with us, but I'm going to leave that part to our Councillor Bob Morrow, to welcome our guests and talk a little bit more about the evening. The format for our evening will be to hear from the project proponent, Mr. Clark, who's with us this evening, and also to hear from Lynda Lukasik from Environment Hamilton. After each speaker, we'll have opportunity for questions from the floor. We have a microphone with a good long cord so that everybody can hear the question. And we're looking forward to an informative evening, and an evening that is respectful of our guests who have traveled to be here with us. Just by way of other housekeeping information, there are washroom facilities on this floor, on this level, and they're just at the back over on that side. There's also water, and we hope that you have a good and informative evening. And we'd like to invite our Councillor Morrow, to come at this time.
Well, thank you, Steve. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, guests from the United States, Pittsburgh to be exact, and dear friends all. And I want to thank the Sherman Hub for its ongoing excellent work in organizing community meetings and events. I know most of you, I'm sure, come from the Ward 3 area of the Sherman Hub. Perhaps others are from further afield, and everyone is welcome. I just wanted to make a few comments. The proponents have been very available. They met with the Keith Hub group several weeks ago, the city's Board of Health last week, and this is kind of the biggest community meeting so far. So I'm hoping that all questions can be raised and we can all sit here long enough till that happens. In my own mind, and I'm not trying to guide the discussion, I want to hear what the community has to say and respond accordingly. There are different strands of issues. One, the pollution issue, of course, which I know will be addressed by Admiral Clark and Dr. Lynda Lukasik. Where did Lynda get to? Oh, there she is. Hi. Representing Environment Hamilton, and she has a list of questions that was good enough to put together. So we got an expert to guide us in that area on behalf of Hamilton people and anyone else who has advice. Also, the issue of image is raised quite a bit. Do we want that kind of industry? And the fear of other people's garbage being brought into our community is something that I think should be addressed as well. And the other side of the coin is the fact that it's a widespread European use, and they were seemingly more aware of environmental issues than we were earlier. There is the question of taxes. I've read $500,000 in taxes a year, which is not to be sneered at as we try to replace the industrial jobs and companies lost here and elsewhere across the Western world, but particularly in our manufacturing city, traditionally so. And there's the jobs. I'm hoping the numbers, estimates of jobs can be mentioned as well. And these are all factors that go into it that I hear from people that should be part of the discussion tonight, and then everyone will have a chance to formulate their own opinion, and I'll be all ears in that regard. So thank you for gathering. I've had the great good fortune of following Bernie Morelli, who did a great job for Ward 3 and for the city, and it's been really the greatest privilege has been the groups in the ward that operate in such a good and I would say sophisticated fashion. I've been really impressed with how issues are addressed, discussed, and the caliber of debate, and I really compliment the Sherman Hub and the other groups on that. It, I think, makes for good local democracy. I should say there was discussion at the Board of Health, which is the same as the City Council. One councillor made the suggestion that should this company go ahead in operation, that the city be the monitoring agency of any pollution issues. There is also the zoning factor that was raised and the role of the Port Authority. And I can address those if there are questions, not too hard questions. I can touch on sort of the basics of each issue if you want during the course of the evening. So thank you for gathering. I'm looking forward to a good discussion and hearing what everyone has to say. And it's this kind of meeting that I think is so important as we go on. Something I always do is introduce candidates. I'm an old politician from way back, and I appreciate those who jump in, the men and women who make themselves available, particularly for council. But will all candidates for public offices fall, please stand. And if you could just each, and I know there's two old mayors here, Larry Deanne and myself. We don't count because we're not running. But my first is Brian McCaddy, running for mayor, now councillor for Ward 1, which I was alderman for Ward 1 many years ago. And could the rest of you please just introduce yourselves and what it is you're running for, so I don't mangle any positions or names.
Lorna Morrow, Ward 4.
Ward 4, very good. Well, thanks for coming. Welcome to Ward 3. Great. I've seen your show on TV. Matt? Very good. Public Ward, right. And did we miss the gentleman there? Oh, Ralph, hi. Yeah, good. Very good. Well, I wish you all well. And I just should say, I'm hoping, oh, sorry. Tim, it's a bit of a glare, plus my aging eyes. I'm hoping to get the candidates for council together. There are several issues with the stadium, and this one, of course, and other across the board that I've had the pleasure of getting involved in, and I thought I should compare notes with you and make sure everyone's aware of some of these things. So I may be trying to get a hold of you if you have any time the next few weeks. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thanks for coming. Can you hear me all well? I'm Bob Clark, and I'm here to discuss the proposed technology. We have, as I do, it'll be about an hour, but it's only going to be about 20 minutes for this technical discussion and a status of where we are. This presentation will be on our website tomorrow. So you'll be able to have access to it, so don't worry about if you can't follow it or you can't see it from there. I'll try and explain it briefly, but I'll just get the major message across, and then we'll continue. You'll be able to call it up. I didn't want to bring 100 or 200 copies because that wouldn't be environmentally friendly, so we'll do it electronically. And just to show you for the example I have here, the two pictures on here, the one on the left is lightning. That is the fourth state of matter, which we'll get into very briefly. But essentially, that's the fourth state of matter. It's a flow of directional flow of electrons. In plasma, which I'll talk about is exactly the same thing. It's like lightning. It's a directional flow of electrons, and that's one of the processes in combination with gasification that we'll use for this process. I'll leave this up for a second. This is the area that we're going to talk about. Leveraged Green Energy is a U.S. private equity fund. It is one that is focused on looking at the best technologies in the world. My particular background is I come first from the nuclear world. Used to run a good portion of Westinghouse Nuclear worldwide, working my way up from the ranks as an engineer in the plants all the way through, but with a focus on technology, a focus on adapting, finding technology, and making technology useful, more efficient, and then working in other power type plants. And I also have a military background as well, that we did a lot of technology. So I've got a power plant background. And I also have a background with robotics and tooling design and efficiency. Efficiency is probably the most efficient use right now for what I'm doing, because I've got a global background in optimizing technologies from all around the world to do something different, but the databases are already there that says it's acceptable, and that's what we're going to get into and show you. Leveraged Green Energy is a U.S.-based private equity fund, but our investors are green people. We have several pension funds out of Scandinavia, in Sweden and Denmark, who obviously are very vested in environmental business. In fact, as far back as 1972, I can remember Denmark, who had at that time had a very small percentage of internally generated power, and they made a social commitment to go green and to have the ability of generating their own power, become self-sufficient. They're that way today, but that was a consensus that they made. We also have a couple of other owners, big banks and other pension funds, all with what I refer to as socially responsible investment as one of their key criteria. Obviously, if you're in a pension fund business like the Scandinavians, it's the employees, civil employees, and then the teachers fund. You have to make sure you make money, but at the same time, they want to make sure it's coming from socially responsible investment. The company PFMSI, Port Fuels Materials Service, is a Canadian entity. It's right here in Hamilton, and that is the company that's proposed and has equity investment to go and build this plant that I'm going to talk about tonight. So you have a Canadian entity right here. I'll get into a little bit more details as we discuss it. I have a combination presentation. One is to describe the technology so that you understand it just in generic terms. For those scientists in the room, I can talk to you separately, offline, privately. We can set up meetings to go and talk about the details. And then a status of the activities that we have so far. And this is part of what I gave to the City Council Board of Health last Wednesday or Thursday. And then status of it, and then comments, Q&A. And if we don't finish the Q&A, I'm available, or you can go through the website and ask the questions. Any question that's asked will be answered. If I don't have the data at the top of my head, we'll get it. If it has to do with a lot of the ongoing studies that we have, well, then we have to wait until the studies are done. If it has to do with some of the material we're presenting to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, well, it has to go through their processes and then it'll come back again. But we'll get through everything. Okay, you can't read this. Let me just hit the high points. This is talked about as the company, the Port Fuels and Materials Services Incorporated. It's a combination of gasification, which does the mechanical and chemical work in transforming waste into a raw synthetic gas, and I'll have another slide on that. And then it goes into a plasma converter, which conditions and cleans the bulk of this raw gas into a very, very clean synthetic gas. And I'll talk more in the next page. This has some numbers on how efficient it is, that's fine. But from a local solutions, and this is a summary slide, it says the majority of the waste feedstock is going to come from right here, locally, from within the port or immediately adjacent to the port. I know there's been a lot of discussions or articles that are written and questions that I've received from other organizations. It's right here. There's no need to go anywhere else because enough of the potential fuel, not waste, fuel in my vernacular, is here. The design is not such like a large incinerator where you have to haul things in from all over the world or all over the province or whatever else. It's designed and scaled to the size where you do things locally so that, again, it meets our environmental, SRI, socially responsible requirement of trying to treat everything as close to the source as you possibly can, which means you generate the waste. If you generate the waste at the port, it could be coming from the ships coming in, from their bilges or whatever containers and stuff that they have, or there's a rail line coming into the port, or there's 120 tenants at Hamilton Port. I mean, the bulk of it's right here. There's no need, and it's not scaled to be are required to go outside of the immediate vicinity. And the Port of Hamilton loves the idea because what they're doing is they also agree with the concept of treating waste as close to the source as possible, but then that then becomes a best practice. You know, you save on the footprint, on the environmental footprint of hauling waste in or out to other locations, and then having the ability of this local plant to provide electricity or heat back to the tenants in the port. And the bottom line on this, again, this is a summary, I'll get into more details, is that it's a major local capital investment. I've been asked many times, you know, what the total number is going to be. We're in the process of working with engineering, procurement, and construction contractors to get estimates. These are things that I need to be able to provide that. I'll tell you, it'll be about $100 million. That's a number that's a rough number, plus or minus. People have asked me so many times, I just throw a number out right now. That's a pretty valid number, but it's not definite because I have contractors I have to work with, and I have to get through the permitting process first to be able to say it's okay to do before I complete those. So there'll be numerous operational construction phase. I'll get into some numbers a little bit more, but the councillor has already mentioned it's about $500,000 a year in taxes. So that's the summary. For the technical people that are here, you probably already know this. It's not incineration. Gasification is a process that converts waste into a medium. It's a fluid medium, a gas, and it operates unlike incineration. Incineration is, the definition of the word where it comes from is rendered to ashes. When you have an incinerator, you burn things, you combust things, you render it to an ash. We don't have ash. The system, some of the comments I got in, written comments, is it sounds too good to be true. Well, it is in a sense that the combustion doesn't exist. You are operating in an oxygen-deprived environment, which means you cannot have a combustion process take place. And because of the heat that happens, and I'll show you a technical picture here that explains why it doesn't happen, and you can look it up on the website, but physically it transforms itself into a raw synthetic gas in the first stage, and so there is none. Staying on the gasification, because that's the first stage of the process, gasification is not new. Gasification has been around 180 to 200 years. This describes some of the uses and some of the feedstocks that converts the material without combustion. This is the definition at the top. And we have, the world has gasification facilities everywhere. It's been operating for, as I mentioned, 200 years. So the gasification principle is very well known. The science is there. It's very well proven. Similarly, we have the same thing for plasma. Plasma has also been around for 200 years. It's not a new process. The distinction is in the last 20 years or so. Well, 1960s, I was at Westinghouse, but I wasn't at Westinghouse in 1960. But they had designed plasma use to do work for the NASA program on the heating tiles. That was like the first commercial use. Before that, it's been used in metallurgical applications and foundries for process improvement of the manufacturing. In the 1980s and 90s, they tried to use plasma originally for waste processing. At that particular point in time, there was only, and still was up until this technology was developed, it was a single-stage process, which meant you did everything in a single plenum, and you used the plasma torches, and you did a whole number of different things, and it just wasn't cost-effective. So it wasn't until very recently, and as you'll see in the next couple of slides, that it became not just cost-effective, but energy efficient by, instead of using the previous processes, you used both a gasifier and a plasma converter. You can't read this, but the pictures show on the left-hand side a fluidized bed gasifier. There's a lot of technical reasons down at the bottom that show why this is very efficient. Now, the gasifier is the workhorse. It uses a fluidized bed, which is different from a lot of others in the past. Instead of using air is 72% nitrogen, which is an inert gas. A lot of gasifiers use air. And that if you used air by itself, well, then you're heating up a lot of inert gases that is inefficient. So in the particular design we have, we're using an oxy steam, but the oxygen is a very low percentage, and then you use steam because when you do this process, you're able to have a self-sufficient, self-generating process. When you put the waste in, it turns into this gasification mode, and then you get a raw synthetic gas coming out of the top of the gasifier. A lot of benefits to it, but if you just think in a simple mass and energy balance, it says, well, I'm not cooking up extra nitrogen, extra air. I'm not using pet coke, which all of the other entities do, which they need to maintain their process. That's a fossil fuel. Fossil fuels are recognized, this particular type is recognized over in Europe as, well, if you're adding fossil fuel to it, guys, you're no longer a renewable energy source. You're what we're calling a hybrid. And in Europe and in the Mediterranean, they have tariffs. They have incentives for doing renewable, and it says you're no longer eligible if you're adding fossil fuel. Doesn't work. So that's another thing that we have eliminated. But by doing this and having this instead of an energy-intensive requirement, the gasifier now sustains itself. So you get a physical improvement amount of energy that's able to be created because it's a self-sustaining process. Because you don't have the air to process, it's a much smaller volume of raw synthetic gas going out of the top of the gasifier to be processed. So when it leaves the top of the gasifier, it goes into the plasma converter. If there's any inorganic material, which means organic means you can use it for energy. If it's inorganic, like dirt or stone or something like that that has no energy value, it drops out the bottom and is passed over into the second stage, which is the plasma converter. You now have a plasma converter that works on a much smaller volume of very good gas, even though it's raw synthetic gas. And in this raw synthetic gas going over, you have chars, tars, particulates, you've got carryover, which you would expect coming out of just purely a gasifier. You use a plasma converter, and this is where I get to the lightning part, where you have a graphite self-consuming electrode. The other plasma companies that are out there, they use in a single plenum, they use 3 different plasma torches that are water-cooled to do all this mechanical and chemical work that I just described in the gasifier that now is able to be done by itself. So you eliminated 3 water-cooled torches. You have a self-consuming graphite torch. You have a very high heat. This is 7,000 degrees C, if you will, if you're in the vicinity of the torch itself. And then throughout the other area, you're out to about 1,600 degrees or whatever. You also have infrared. And what this does, what the plasma does, is it cracks. The technical term is it cracks. It cracks the compound molecules into simple molecules, which means it converts them into hydrogen, carbon monoxide, things that are single molecules, so they're able to be processed better. Anything that is inorganic then becomes, as you see at the bottom, it says, what it says is slag tapping or metals recovery. This inorganic component, which is stone or rock or whatever, what happens there is it's tapped off because it's not usable in its condition. It has been legislated by regulatory authority, UK Environment, to be classified not as a waste. It's a vitrified product. It looks like black glass, if you will, or black coal, but it's very hard, and it's passed all of the regulatory tests in Europe to be classified not as a waste. And what I found out in England, which was very surprising to me, is even though you pass the engineering test, you have to pass a commercial test, which means, okay, you meet these non-leachability tests, but can you sell it? And the answer is yes, you sell it. There's a combination. It can be used for road aggregate and construction side because it doesn't leach. It can be used for, depending on how you work the process, it can be used as rock wool, which is insulation. It can be cast into various things. There's a lot of different type of uses for it. So it's a saleable product. What you have as a result is you now have a very rich, highly calorific value, very energy intensive synthetic gas coming out of the top of the plasma converter. And then that synthetic gas can be used for multiple reasons. It can be used for creation of energy in steam engines or turbines, or gas engines or turbines. It can be used for hydrogen. If you have hydrogen, you can be used for solid oxide fuel cells, which I'll show you in another slide or two. But it has multiple uses. So one of the most significant aspects is the ability of the input to be able to take almost any type of material you can think of on the input side. As long as you get it to a certain size, it's mixed to have a certain calorific value, and it's mixed also to have a preset level of moisture, so that you don't have to waste a whole lot of time doing drying, when you could be using the energy on the output side to be able to create electricity. The better benefit, what really attracted, one of the many things that attracted me, is because of this you have a very low profile facility. It's not as high as this floor. We're on the 3rd floor. It's probably a floor and a half. Plus, I noticed that gigantic stack outside from the cotton mill. You have about a 15-meter stack above the building, and you won't see it. You won't see it because everything is low profile. I'll show you our Swindon facility here in a minute. I'll show you pictures of that, and I'll show you just exactly what I meant. I have two slides for the engineers that are in the room. The first one here is the effective temperature on tar levels in the synthetic gas. And it just shows that when you get up to the temperature, you're eliminating the tar levels. That's one of the goals. The second is the cracking of the organics with the plasma converter. And this again is temperature. On the left-hand side, you see some representative molecules that have been in the first stage, in the gasifier. So the raw synthetic gas goes into the plasma converter, and when you're done with the plasma converter, you have minuscule levels because of the efficiency of the operation of the plasma converter. And this is just a simple one-step, two-step. It shows how the two are combined and how you have an excellent product. This is just a slide of the vitrified byproduct, which is called plasma rock. And these are, it has two rows, you can't see, you probably can't see. It's got two rows of heavy metals. The acceptance levels are the magenta color, the reddish color on the back. Those are the acceptance levels under what's known as the waste incineration directives in UK and in Europe. The front row, which you cannot see, is the actual levels of the vitrified byproduct and plasma rock, which shows that it's extremely, extremely good at what it's supposed to do. Again, these are all available. The references are here, the directives are here, the test results are here, and we have a lot more than this going into the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. This is the Swindon facility. Heathrow Airport is west of London. Swindon is southwest of London. The upper right-hand side is the same picture as you saw on the front page. Upper right-hand picture, first of all, is the plasma torch in an operating system. It shows the directional flow of electrons going from the tip of the plasma graphite torch to the bottom of the pool, and that arc is what creates the heat and the ultraviolet light. The plant, the next picture below that, is the operating facility, the test facility that we've been operating for 6 years or so with an engine, because one of the most significant items in failure modes for a lot of the predecessor type technologies is that you do not have a clean enough technology to be able to have a synthetic gas to run in an engine or in a turbine. We have several documents, Fichtner Engineering out of Stuttgart, Fichtner Pacific, both of them have stated in their internal V&V verification validation that this is the first process that's been able to beat the problems of the past and have a clean enough gas to run in the engines. We've had testing in Liebherr engines, as you've seen here, in Siemens, in Jumbacher, in Solar Caterpillar. We've had a lot of testing there. We've also been validated by the Renewable Energy Testing Center. A company called Technicon in Sacramento, California, runs this for the U.S. Army. They do this as a central verification facility so that the U.S. doesn't have to go and qualify 50 different times. It's an efficiency mode. They went over to the UK, to this facility several times with their own independent analyzers and whatever, and the end result of that is a formal report that documents the acceptability of this technology for use at U.S. DoD, Department of Defense facilities. That's all the militaries. I'm Navy. My Navy bases, all the bases, the Army, Air Force, Marines, all the bases can now have access to this. It's a centralized database, plus the federal facilities for the U.S. government. There's also a third testing that we did for the technical people here. It's called an adiabatic flame. We tested the flame temperature of the synthetic gas and a lot of other attributes at the Gas Technology Institute in Chicago. and the results were extremely positive. It was actually better than natural gas. And why would that be of significance? Well, a lot of entities want to supplement their natural gas load with synthetic gas. It's because it's cheaper. It would be cheaper. The bottom right-hand picture is the back of the test facility. It shows the engine, it shows the cooling and cleaning system, and it shows a little stack above the roof, if you can see that. There are actually 2 plasma pilot plants in here. And then across the street, and this is a industrial park, across the street it has a facility called PRL, Production Rhodium Limited, where you process precious metals. And they're taking all the autocatalysts because they have platinum and rhodium in them. And when you have the ability of the plasma has settling in the bottom of the plasma chamber where you have slag and you have metal, and you can actually siphon off the precious metal. I did this personally in 1984. I was at Westinghouse and I was using platinum rhodium heaters for one of my nuclear applications, like brazing, welding, if you would. And it got to be expensive to have all these wands going back and forth. So we were able to decontaminate it. I had no idea what this technology was at that time. That was one of the first times I used it. They were able to go and recapture that. So I've been familiar with the technology well before then. Since then, I've used cutting and welding in several of my companies, plasma torches. So I'm very familiar, and I did a study for Credit Suisse even before I knew about these guys on a worldwide basis. So I'm pretty excited about it. And the picture on the left is just the operating room. It's a very easy system to run. And when we get into the questions, I have some numbers on how many people actually run the plant. It makes no difference because we're going to the Ontario Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, but there are some references here. First is the US EPA. You know, if you still qualify to the Ontario references, but it always helps if you have other people telling you what's good and bad. The US EPA in December of last year has qualified this and saying it's materially different than incineration, guys, and it does not have to follow under incineration rules because the gasifier does not have a flame and it's not a combustion process. So it doesn't create ash. I mean, there are a number of different factors that went into their study. The other 2, or simply more references from the European Commission that talk about the benefits of plasma gasification over incineration. LGE is a technology investment company. We've invested in gas plasma because we believe it. I live and die in the technology world. When I did the study for Credit Suisse, my conclusion at that time was single vessel plasma gasification is not going to work because it's not cost effective. The only time it was effective was when it went to places like Japan, who is an island that have precious space left, and so they incentivized the heck out of the ability to bring plasma over there, and they did. But that's not a normal process. So at that particular time, didn't work anywhere else. Now it will for the reasons I just described, because of the ability to create more energy than any other process that it has, the ability to take in all these various fuel sources, and the ability on the back end of doing multiple things. One of them is solid oxide fuel cells. Now, for a general reference, at the bottom of this page, I just have a description of if you have a unit of mass going into a system, then you have something coming out the back end. It's obviously better to generate more electricity on the back end because it's a saleable product, so the more you do it per unit, it's better. And it shows you in a range, and they're only ranges, steam turbines, gas engines, gas turbines, and then fuel cells. And fuel cells by far are the top of the ladder. We have an investment in second generation fuel cells. A company called SOFC Power, which came out of HT Ceramic out of Switzerland, and has shown so much promise that it is significantly more efficient and significantly lower cost operations at a lower value, so that over time, solid oxide fuel cells should be used instead of engines and turbines. Right now, it's being used in Europe. Right now, this second, it's being used in Europe in residential applications. We plan and are in our process of taking that from a testing bed of just operating in residences to bringing it up to industrial applications, because it's a big money saver. All the big industries are looking for ways to save money, and this is going to be one of them. They're going to get more power per unit. This is a single slide pictorial, and I know the Hamilton Spectator is here. I gave this to the Hamilton Spectator a while back during our last meeting. It shows on the left-hand side all the different types of materials that can be processed. The upper orange ones on the left-hand side are commercial and industrial, for precious metal recovery rather than generation of power, which just says it's got such a versatile approach for the different type of waste streams you can take. In the middle, we just have gasification and plasma cleaning, and then I have a picture there of the plasma rock coming out. It's a closed system. This system is a closed loop system. The biggest issue that I would expect, and I'm approaching, is on the airshed that you have here in Hamilton. So that is really important. There's also on the water side, since there's no water, that's not an issue. And on the material going to the landfill, that's what we're trying to avoid. On the input side, we do the screening for the recyclates, anything you can recycle, metals, plastics, whatever. You take that out and recycle it. In our particular design, what we're trying to do as well is, since everything's coming here from the port, it's come from wherever else, we're trying to turn that into RDF, which is called refuse-derived fuel, off-site, not here at this site, so that the majority of the input coming to us is actually relatively clean material to be processed, as opposed to anything else. On the far right side, I just have 5 different examples of what can be created as a result. Electricity, heat, gas to liquids, which we didn't get into. Some of the mining companies that we're dealing with in the United States and elsewhere, they don't need electricity or fuel. They want diesel. They want something that's more efficient for running their process. Hydrogen, and then solid oxide fuel cells. So, but right here at the Hamilton port, we're only talking about electricity and heat going into the people that are closest to us. Now, status of activities. I will read a lot of this because this is what you'll need to hear. And this is what I discussed with the Board of Health. We started with the Ministry of Environment about a year and a half ago, January, at the provincial level. We've met with them. Since then, have obviously met with the local Hamiltonian Ministry of Environment. We have met back in September the 18th, I believe it was. We co-sponsored an introductory conference on renewable energy with McMaster University. Your mayor was there to kick it off for us, which we're extremely grateful for Mayor Bettina to do that. On the 3rd of April, we published a notice of commencement, which according to the requirements, that's just letting everybody know this is the beginning of a process, the beginning of a permitting process. And so it's a hello, how are you? This is us. We're notifying you that this is what we'd like to do. And it's a start of a year-long process, just on the permitting, before anything else is done, to go and justify not just the technology, but how the technology operates within the local environment. So you have to do a number of different things we're in the process of doing. We've had many meetings with organizations and community hubs. I'll get to that in a minute. I have a list here of studies that we're in the process of doing: geology, hydrology, surface water, site development, design and operations, traffic, social economic conditions, natural heritage conditions, cultural heritage conditions, and then, of course, the voluntary one is called a human health risk assessment, which we decided, and even though it's a very detailed report and it's a voluntary report, we made the decision early on as this is really something we want to get into, and you'll be able to understand why in the next couple of slides, because not just do we believe in the technology, but we want to be able to prove it, validate it, verify it, and also help other organizations by some of the processes that we have. We also are trying to do the community outreach, and one of which is in addition to everything we're doing here, is to form civic or community liaison committees, and we have people that have already volunteered. Is Lawrence Smink here? Hi, Lawrence. That's your representative from the Sherman Hub on this committee. We have from the Keith Hub, we have Steve Rowe. Steve? From Clean Air Hamilton, we have James Kashpersets. I don't know if he's here. We have from McMaster Universities, we have Lynn Stewart. Lynn? Okay. I haven't met everybody here yet. We have an environmental consultant, Greg Zilberbrand. Greg? And for our community relations, longtime Hamiltonian Keith Reed. Keith? And we have others that we have requested to be able to come, because we have to form a baseline like we're doing right now, but then we have to be able to get information back to you, because I can't come here every week to give updates. But through your representative and through the other mention, I come from Pittsburgh. I'm very familiar with the issues that you have here. Before that, I came from Bethlehem. So I've been traveling in these circles for a long time. I know the impact and the sensitivity, and I promise you that we're going to address all of these to your satisfaction. The air quality study will demonstrate the emissions meet Ontario Reg 419 air quality. The HRA will show there's no significant additional risk. And we will also consider the cumulative effects of this process in addition to your existing ones. So there'll be a very quantifiable difference. We'll be able to look at everything. And that we have an open house coming up in the fall. And the reason for the open house is that we have a lot of studies ongoing right now. I don't have the data to give to you to be able to tell you what they are. The last slide is the sensors and biomarkers. Is not just are we trying to mitigate waste. You know, we don't create the waste. You create the waste. Every industry in the world creates waste. Every household creates waste. We're trying to take away issues, environmental issues, and resolve those issues by treating the waste as close to the source as possible, turning things into recyclables, doing whatever, and then continuing on with a very solid and impressive green technology. We also have other programs going on. At McMaster University, we have developmental programs working with them on this gas plasma and on solid oxide fuel cells, but we also have a new one that we're working on. And this is development of low-cost, handheld, or things that you can put on your clothing, sensors to measure levels of contamination. This is going to be a breakthrough technology. This is not something that we're talking about here for this, but I want you to know the other things so you see the whole picture. And the determination of biomarkers that indicate exposure of organizations to contaminations and their effect on health. you'll be able to monitor, you'll be able to track things. I mean, these are other related technologies that we have invested in and are going to continue to invest in, because I'm looking at the whole life cycle. I'm not just looking at a piece of it. We're trying to do a whole life cycle. And that's it. I'll cut to the chase. I have a list of questions, Steve, that you presented. I can either answer them or take questions from the floor. Depends on you.
I think what we'd like to do is take questions from the floor, but if there are a couple of those questions first that you would like to go to, Bob, and respond to those, they're likely to be questions that we'll hear from the floor anyhow, and then we'll go to questions from the floor, and at that point we'll use our microphone here with a nice long cord so everyone can hear the question. But let's go to a couple of questions here.
I received a list from the Sherman Hub of questions. You did very well. Areas where volume and transportation, local air and water quality, operations, local direct benefits, technology. That's one. What are the local benefits? Obviously, you know, the city is going to get $500,000 a year in taxes. That's one benefit. Councillor already mentioned that. There are going to be like 30 to 50 full-time jobs depending on the final configuration of the plant. Now, who are those? What company runs that? We're still in negotiations for our EPC contractors, for our operators. We'll still figure that out. Can't give you a specific number, but it'll be 30 to 50 there. There'll be hundreds of jobs based on the construction for the time of the construction. There'll be other service-related benefits to the companies that live in the area, work in the area, that will be providing support. The type of jobs, you know, obviously plant manager, admin, environmental manager, technical, mechanics. You'll have maintenance people, shift supervisor, electrical. You'll have forklift operators. You'll have housekeeping. We'll have the entire range of opportunity for employment at this particular site right up the street from here. Most of the, we have a traffic study ongoing, so that'll tell you, or that will tell all of us if there's going to be a significant difference, and I don't believe there will be. I've monitored all of the reports from Hamilton Port Authority for the last several years, a number of trucks going in and out. Hopefully, you know, we'll have the people inside that HPA area coming to us as opposed to going wherever else. We also have the ships. The ships right now have a footprint because trucks got to go off the site. Same thing with the rail side. So we'll have more specific data on that. Are the emission impacts better or worse? Well, I personally believe they are. I could talk for an hour on that, but maybe Dr. Lukasik will ask that question later.
Is let the audience interest sort of direct us. And if you have a question, I'm wondering if you could just sort of come to the side or one of the aisles. And all that we would ask is that folks actually ask a question. I think we've all been to meetings where it wasn't really a question, it was a speech. And so we're just asking for genuine questions, please. Matthew.
Thank you for returning to our neighborhood. My question is specifically, we had spoken a little bit about this at the last meeting, about the potential for toxic waste. I was wondering if you'd be willing to go on the record about the potential for this facility to process toxic waste, and if so, how would that be transported, and if so, what types of toxic waste would be potentially processed in this plant?
I can talk forever on any question. Now, does it have the capability of processing toxic waste? Yes, it does. It can process toxic waste the same way it processes any type of waste. That's not in a permit. Not in the application for the permit. We have more than sufficient non-hazardous material right now to do that. We have no plans. I mentioned it before. I'll mention it again. You can go on the record. It's already been reported in the papers that we don't have plans right now. There's more than enough, more sufficient to do it right now with the non-hazardous.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, very much for your presentation. I found it great. Here's my question for you. If you located your plant down here at the bottom of Sherman, would you require any additional or new or improved infrastructure from the City of Hamilton or from the Port Authority at their cost?
Well, actually, yes, I've been working it's from the Port Authority. What we have is the Port Authority is a federal institution. They have federal lands. They have federal lands and they own the buildings. So I am going to put equipment inside buildings. They are going to be, right now the lot that we have has a rail line going through the middle. Hamilton Port Authority is going to move the rail line down to the bottom, and they're going to remove an existing structure that's there. So they are doing this for Hamilton Port Authority at their cost.
Anything from the city?
Not that I'm aware of, because as far as I understand, it's on federal property, so Hamilton Port is who I'm dealing with to make the site ready for use.
Thanks for the answer.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to ask, basically, like, because the process is set up to create energy, what happens when it produces too much energy, and what can you do with that extra energy if it does get to that point? So, example, the economy improves and the port starts taking more garbage or incinerated items, get degasifying items. What happens when that energy becomes an abundance and it can't be reused?
It's a very theoretical question.
Yeah, well, it happens with our own energy, with the Ontario power generation, and it ends up costing us money to get rid of it.
Okay,
so we end up producing too much, and then the taxpayers are technically on the hook to get rid of it because we can't have too much. So I'm curious to know when this produces too much, or if it has the potential of doing so.
I appreciate your extended discussion, because now I understand where you're coming from. The concept is you're producing everything close to the source. We're not a multi-thousand megawatt facility. We create 20 megawatts. And of the 20 megawatts, probably 17 are going to be net. They're going to be available in electricity to the local people in the Hamilton port. We won't get there because we're insignificant in relation to what you've experienced right here and what I've seen experienced in the U.S.
My question is the other side of that same coin. What happens when the Port Authority is not able to provide you with enough raw materials to feed your process? The U.S. EPA has identified two key ingredients, or two key factors in gasification plants' success. One is the positioning of them close to waste or close to cornfields. Absent both of those in the Hamilton Harbor, where is your material going to come from if the Port Authority is not able to provide it?
From the local industry that's adjacent. Right now we have discussions on what's called feed supply agreements. It has to be preliminary discussions because we don't have a permit. We're not authorized to do anything past that. We're also a scale, it's a small scale, as I mentioned. We have more than enough right now that is expected to last for 10 years. The scale is really important. As I briefly mentioned before, compared to an incinerator, the incinerator require extremely large scales in order for them to be cost efficient. We don't. Our entire design and concept is to be decentralized, to be small, to be local, to be able to fit independently and operate independently. Your question is understood. But it's not MSW. I'm not fighting for MSW. I don't really want MSW. MSW is the low end. It's wet. It has odors. It has whatever else. I'm more into the construction, demolition. Let me go back to another picture.
Could you tell us what MSW is?
Yes. Sorry for speaking in acronyms. MSW is municipal solid waste. That's garbage. It's black bag waste. It's the normal stuff. When you take a look at it, there's more than enough organizations that can go and handle that. The stuff that I see going to the landfills is the stuff that can't be processed, and to our technology, it makes no difference what it is. And so obviously I am targeting the higher level non-MSW, construction, demolition, ICI, industrial, commercial, that type of waste. But again, it's a matter of scale. Keep that in mind. This is a small scale in relation to other areas. Now, one of the questions I did get was, okay, this pilot program versus whatever else. These gasifiers that we have in commercial application, gasifiers, the company I'm working with is Energy Products of Idaho, O2 Tech. They have about well over 100 applications of their gasifiers going from 100% solid to 100% liquid and everything in between. The plasma converter that I'm using is coming from Tektronix. They have, that I referenced, I had worked with in Alabama in 1984. Tektronix is also co-located with APP in Swindon. They run the PRL facility. They have 85 operating plasma converters since 1965. Both of these designs are mid-range for the operating facilities that they have. So it's not an issue of them operating.
Perhaps we have time for about 2 more questions before we go to our next speaker.
I understand the plant size or capacity you're planning is 190,000 or 200,000 tons per year and 20 megawatt. Is that correct?
It's broken into 2 pieces. The first is called the gas plasma plant, which has a capacity of 170,000 incoming. Then it goes through sorting. Then it goes through recyclables. Then you do that. And then you go through the moisture reduction. And this is on a reference design. And then you have 100,000 that actually get physically processed. What we are negotiating with the organizations right now is to pre-process this off-site and then bring us the finished product. But the 170 is the number you're referring to. There's another number that's called the direct plasma plant, and that's just where you have a single small plasma converter all by itself that would be able to work on inorganic material. That if you don't have any calorific value, it would be bad business to put it into the gas plasma. So you have it set to the side operating by itself. That's where you get up to your 190 or 200.
Okay, so my question is several. How is your technology, which is also plasma gas, compared to Plaxco in Ottawa, who also have a plasma gas technology, but they have repeatedly failed over a number of years, and the cost is something like 5 times the cost of an incinerator plant. How is that technology different? And the other thing is your technology at the commercial level, or what's the capacity of the Swindon, UK? Is it a small pilot type of installation?
Yeah.
So have you got any commercial plants running?
As I mentioned, independently, we have like 100 of each on a gasifier, and then the commercial side. We have 2 operating pilot plants in Swindon. To get back to your Plaxco question, Plaxco doesn't work on a fluidized bed gasifier, which is what we have. They also have a significant amount of single plenum versus double plenum. They have a lot of what I refer to as short circuiting, which means working in a larger plasma volume, you have a slipstream and particulate matter get by, and the particulate matter is what caused the majority of their problems from operating their engines and turbines. So there are some very significant design differences in the different plants.
And the last question on the emissions, like what level of emissions are expected from the design concept that you have?
We're going to meet every emission standard that you have. And this is what I have on my slides, that we're guaranteeing this. And as far as the commercial aspects, we're not asking anybody for any money. We put our money into it. So that's another significant difference because we believe in the technology.
And time for one more question before we go to our next speaker. We will have time for some more questions after our next speaker as well.
Thank you for presentation today, sir. My question is, what percentage of garbage will be coming in from outside of Hamilton?
I'm not planning on any. I agree with the audience.
Everything's local?
I don't want anything coming from outside the immediate vicinity. We don't need it. We don't want it. I'm the same mentality that you are.
Signed, sealed, and delivered?
As well as I can do it.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds like that was a good question.
Great, thank you. We're going to go on to our next speaker, but before we do, Mr. Clark has come a long way to be with us this evening, and we really appreciate him taking this time, and I wonder if we could give him a warm welcome from our neighborhood for coming here this evening.
Thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is Lynda Lukasik. And while Lynda is making her way forward, I'm wondering, you've been sitting quite a while. Would you like to just kind of stand and stretch? And since you're doing that, maybe just to the person to your left and to your right, just say hello. You know, we'll make it a social thing. This is neighbors, right? There's some water over at the table, just over this way. They were. We'll just get started again in about a minute or two.
I assume the same thing. Yeah. I'm not sure who is.
Rob's coming back, so I imagine
more questions about the annual tonnage, because what he just said sort of I'm interpreting differently from what they've written here in terms of the capacity of the plant.
Yep.
They've got a capacity listing of 170,000 tons, which says to me that's how much they're seeking approval to be able to actually feed through the facility.
Right.
And in addition, the 30,000 in the separate plasma component.
The other thing that he said that I found interesting was he's talking about a 10-year horizon, that they have enough from this area for 10 years, the industrial, but the plant will last much longer than 10 years. What happens after that, where is it coming from? And as they heard from the open house, so they did Joey Coleman told me and talking about toxic waste, and he said that I have no plans to do it. I don't have any plans to do it. It's a business decision. So as soon as it's profitable,
and I'm interested too because from a technology cost point of view, my understanding is that these plants are very expensive to make. So normally that has an impact on the feedstock you're building. So I'm kind of surprised that these are the types of wastes that they're focused on. When the tipping fees in this, particularly in this part of the world, because it's still pretty cheap and easy to get waste across the board. Ontario's doing a lot of that. Not that I think that's a good thing, but on the economics, on the dollars and cents side of it, I'm still puzzling over how this model makes sense. I can see it has waste, but it makes sense from a financial point of view.
if you could make your way back to your seats, we'll begin again. Just get a tasty bottle of water there and come back to your seats. Okay, so we'd like to welcome Lynda Lukasik from Environment Hamilton. We're very pleased that Lynda is able to be here with us this evening. Wondering if the folks who are still visiting over here could kind of come back and join us so we could have one meeting, please. I don't want to say any names, but I know who you are. Thanks so much. We are neighbors after all, we know each other. And unfortunately, shaming is not one of our values, so I'm not allowed to do it. Anyhow, thanks for coming back. I hope you enjoyed your break and a chance to greet neighbors. Lynda Lukasik is with Environment Hamilton, and Lynda has joined us this evening to talk about this proposed facility and to give us some observations and thoughts and potentially even some questions. There will also be time for questions of Lynda at the end of her presentation. And Environment Hamilton, if you don't already know, is one of our local organizations, a non-profit, and there's opportunity if you were to go to the website to sign up and become a member and support this important organization. So there's a little plug, and we really appreciate Lynda being here tonight. We're going to turn this portion over to Lynda now.
Thanks very much, Steve. I'll just stay here where the mic's already at the right height for me. So as you already heard, I'm Lynda Lukasik. I'm the Executive Director of Environment Hamilton. As an organization, we have a mandate to help Hamiltonians to get the knowledge and skills to be able to enhance and protect the environment in their own neighborhoods. So you won't be surprised to know that we do public education and outreach work, and we also advocate. So on proposals like this, we get involved and we gather information and we ask a lot of questions and we encourage other people to do the same thing. And we believe it's really important for people to be aware of what their rights are within approvals processes so that you can get involved for yourself, get the information and make your own decisions on how you feel about proposals like this. So what I thought I would do here tonight is start to share with you some of the questions that we still have. I was very pleased to have the opportunity to meet with Admiral Clark, sorry, I have to get used to saying that, and one of my board members, and so we did have an opportunity to ask a host of questions. We still do have remaining questions, and we'll continue through this process to ask them. So again, tonight I want to share some of those with you. I should preface my comments too by saying I'm by no stretch of the imagination a technical expert, but I do have some background on air issues. Air is something I spend a lot of time on. So I have a background in biochemistry and spent some time working as part of a research team on air quality issues in Hamilton. And I've also got a background in environmental studies and a degree in environmental planning. So I spend a lot of time, I've trained in looking at issues and reflecting on them and critically analyzing. And I spend a lot of time in my role at Environment Hamilton doing the same thing. So what I've done is I've divided our questions and concerns into three categories: technology, the operation itself, and land use and economic issues. So again, I'm putting these questions out to the community. I hope you'll think about them as well. Go away tonight and maybe reflect on some of what I say and ask questions too. And I would really emphasize the fact that oftentimes in these kinds of processes, it's the common sense questions that are the most important ones. I found that over and over again. So I would say to all of you, don't get hung up on the details of the technology. Don't let it scare you. I think you need to trust your gut and ask questions, both on the pros and the cons that you feel as a community member living here you need to know the answers to. I don't think any question is ever a silly question in these kinds of processes. That at the end of the day, the Provincial Ministry of the Environment did grant the permits for that facility, but the operator never did secure enough contracts to make that facility operational. But I would comment today that those permits still do exist, so there's nothing to rule out the possibility of that facility moving forward. So one of the questions we asked then, and we'll ask again, is this technology first and foremost about energy generation, or is it really about waste disposal? And I think that's an important question. And is it the best use of the waste feedstock, or will it divert from better reuse and recycling initiatives, including, for instance, composting of organic waste? These are really important questions, I think, to consider when we're looking at the facility. There's an argument to be made that some organic waste is better composted than burned as far as value back in nutrients to the soil versus value back in energy generated through thermal destruction. I think that was one of the fundamental concerns we had, for instance, with the sludge gasification facility. What is the nature of the emissions to air produced by the plant? And what harm might these emissions cause? And I think it's really important that all of you sitting here today think about that, because we're sitting right now in a compromised airshed. I don't think that's any surprise to any of you who live in neighborhoods near the industrial core. You're being impacted by what I call the triple whammy effect. Transboundary pollution from the US, mobile emissions from cars and trucks, and industrial emissions, because this isn't the first industrial facility that's here and operational. And while we may have a facility that'll be well within the limits, I think what you need to think about is, have we already passed the tipping point as far as impacts on the local airshed? We have two steel mills operating to varying degrees, one still fully operational, that we know is having impacts right now. And you need to think about that. You need to think about that context. I think one of the challenges you'll find, and we found that with the sludge gasification facility, is from an air quality point of view, because the Ministry of the Environment regulates on a facility-by-facility basis, at the end of the day, that facility's contribution was deemed to be acceptable, even though it was adding to what's already here. So I was pleased to hear that there's going to be a cumulative effects assessment. I'll be very curious to see how that's going to be done. We don't even have the Ministry of the Environment doing that in any serious way, so I think that's one we're really going to want to focus on. ask a lot of questions. It would be great if there was a way that community had some support to do a sort of independent third-party evaluation of those kinds of studies to make sure from another expert's point of view that they've been done in a way that really gets you the answers that you need. So another question is, are the emission impacts from the proposed facility better or worse than other waste disposal methods? Again, it's a sort of a holistic look at what's the nature of the waste and how could it be dealt with. How will air emissions change with variations in what's being fed into the plant? And this is really an important question to ask, as what goes in, obviously, it's common sense, is going to impact what comes out. How will emissions vary for the larger combination gas plasma process as compared to the smaller standalone plasma facility? And this is something I have questions about. We've noted that the company is proposing 2 facilities here, the gas plasma with a maximum capacity of 170,000 tons per year. And again, I have more questions after hearing today that 170 is going to, at the end of the day, not be what might all go into the plant. So I have questions about what the plant is actually being approved for as far as capacity goes. Because when I look at that 170,000 plus 30,000 for the standalone plasma facility, you're talking about a facility as large as the former Swaru waste incinerator. And don't take that as me sort of implying that this technology is the same. I think in fairness, the Swaru technology was horrible. This is advanced modern technology in comparison, but I think the scale of the facility, if you're trying to visualize it, if we do end up with 170,000 going through the gas plasma, 30,000 through the plasma facility, it's a facility the size of Swaru. And you'll all know that that facility once handled all of the municipal waste in Hamilton from households. So I have concerns about that. That in my mind is a large facility. Where is the feedstock going to come from? Is there in fact enough in our industrial core alone to feed the facility that's being built? Is this a proven technology at the scale being proposed for the Hamilton plant? This is a profoundly important question in my mind, because what we have right now is a pilot plant in Swindon and an upscaling by a substantial degree that will take place here in Hamilton, combining the gasification and the plasma technology. I hope it works, but I feel like there are some unknowns in terms of there being no guarantees when the technology is upscaled that everything will go smoothly and it will work well. So again, concerns about Hamilton, a compromised airshed, being the site for what as far as I can tell is the first full-scale test of this technology. And then I have other questions about what the facility will generate on the waste side, because you put stuff in and there's some materials that are going to be coming out. The plasma rock, for instance, that the facility will produce. Are there proven markets in Ontario for that material? I'm not sure where we're at with that. I would imagine through the Ministry of Transportation, there are specifications that would need to be satisfied before a material like this could go to market. And if that doesn't happen, where would that material end up? Would it end up being landfilled and leaving us no further ahead in terms of shifting away from, landfilling waste? Are there plans now or in the future, and this is a question that's already been asked, to seek approvals to process hazardous materials at the proposed facilities? And I have this question is sort of lingering in the back of my mind, because these kinds of technologies are not inexpensive to build. So there's always, as far as I can gather from a cost-benefit point of view, there needs to be some focus on material going in and the tipping fees that can be charged to take that material, and keeping a plant viable from a financial point of view. So I'd be really interested, and I hope we get the details on the financial side of things for the kinds of materials that are going to be accepted into the facility. Is it going to be enough to keep investors happy? Or are we going to end up down the road with a proposal to take hazardous materials at this facility, because obviously tipping fee on that kind of waste is much higher. The proponent could charge a much higher fee to accept that material. And what would that look like? So again, potential future scenario, but maybe the dollars and cents calculations will ease our minds that that's not what's in the cards for any time soon. I'm not sure. I do know that I think one of the things that that originally brought the proponent to Hamilton was the possibility of using the technology to treat the coal tar contamination at Randall Reef. And again, you know, I know that that proposal didn't go anywhere because I think our governments are on their way to remediating that site in other ways. We'll see. But again, I know that was part of the draw, and that this technology is capable, from what we're hearing, of handling more harmful substances. Okay, I want to shift now to talking about the operation itself. If the facility is approved and built, I think the main issue really becomes the operation of the plant. Because again, what we've learned at Environment Hamilton over the years in watching various plants, one of the biggest problems was the way the plant was being operated. The private contractor operating the facility, from what we've been told, was probably not doing things the way that they should have been, and that exacerbated the problems there. So our takeaway lesson from that was that it's critically important over time, once you've got a facility like this built, to make sure that whoever is operating it knows what they're doing, and someone's monitoring their ability to do that. So again, questions need to be asked about the contractor, who that will be operating the facility moving into the future, and how closely they'll be monitored. And again, related questions. What assurances will the proponent provide regarding the quality of management of the facility over its operational life? How well will operations adhere to promised safety and security measures for the community? And who will ensure that this is the reality on the ground? And again, you know, one of the challenges that we found in the work that we do is that a lot of times people assume we've got government with regulations and laws in place, and they're there to protect us. But the reality is that there aren't enough resources on the ground for government to be everywhere all the time watching everything they need to be watching. So I think we need to be talking about, you know, if approvals are granted here, what are the kinds of conditions and requirements that the community could push for to ensure that you're not going to be facing issues? And maybe some requirements that might push the ministry to commit to steps to ensure there are really rigorous checks and balances in place. Another question, too, is the boundaries of the facility service area, and that's been raised already, too. Again, you know, at the end of the day, if this is approved, a permit will be issued that will include a clear statement of what the service area is. And so I think this is, again, somewhere where community needs to pay a lot of attention to how a condition like that is worded. It could be Hamilton only, but again, historically, we've had interesting examples of local operations where waste is brought in, it's processed, and then moved on and deemed to be local waste at that point. So you need to ask a lot of very detailed questions about where the waste is in fact coming from and where it's ending up. And if what this community wants is a facility that clearly generates waste only, or processes waste that's only generated within this community, how do we define locally generated waste? It may sound like semantics, but we've seen examples locally where this becomes really critically important over time. Assuming the likely possibility, however, of a service area beyond the industrial core in the city, what's the potential impact on our community of transporting the waste through the community into the plant? So again, questions about how is the waste going to be moved in? You know, we've heard rail, water, land. Those are important questions to ask. What is the positive or negative impact on the facility of changing economic conditions and energy pricing? And again, this links back to feedstock and to energy generated. And some of them are challenging questions because we don't have crystal balls that we can look into to tell us what the future might hold. But again, you know, think about those kinds of things when you're reflecting on whether this proposal is the right fit for Hamilton. Okay, I want to shift quickly now into the land use and economy category. And there are a number of concerns to consider from land use and economic point of view. Will the facility be a positive or negative influence on the future development of the city's portlands? Some industrial uses attract or potentially repel other uses. And what is a facility like this likely to do for the portlands located on Sherman Avenue North? Maybe a really positive impact, maybe a problematic impact. I think we need to talk about that and think about that. How does the proposed facility feed into the Hamilton Port Authority's land use plan and vision? And I'm sort of sneaking this in here because this is a bit of a bee in my bonnet. But I want to very strongly note that the Port Authority's land use plan, which was finalized in 2002, is very long overdue for a required update. That must also include community consultation. So all of you are very engaged and you're thinking about your community and how you want your community to look and feel. Well, it's 13 years later and lots of things have changed. The port has acquired a lot more property. They've handed some properties over to the city. They're doing new things with their properties. And you all have a right, and you should have an opportunity to provide some input into how the port is planning for and using Hamilton's waterfront lands. Port Authority is an entity of the federal government. Federal government is representing all of us. So I would urge you to consider how you as a community organization, as individuals might take some action. Contact the port CEO, Bruce Woods, and let him know you want an opportunity to provide some input on the land use plan. And or Port Board Chair Mel Hockrig, I didn't even know his name. I think we need to pull the port into some community conversations. Request that the port undertake that long overdue land use plan. And then there are other questions like how much of the economic benefit of this facility accrues to Hamilton through jobs and taxes, and how much goes to investors through profits. In other words, what are the trade-offs we're making and what's the payback for the community, and how much is going, you know, you've heard that there's some offshore investors here, how much of that money is leaving the community? So these are some of our core questions today, and we'll continue to ask questions, and we really hope that you'll continue to do the same. This is a formal process that's already underway through the provincial environmental assessment process, and it's useful to make yourself familiar about how that process works. It's an environmental screening, and you've got opportunities along the way to provide your input, to look at a screening report and provide feedback. There's also an opportunity, if you feel strongly that there are outstanding concerns later in the process that haven't been addressed, to request what's called an elevation request to an individual environmental assessment. We call them colloquially, I can't talk tonight, bump up requests. The challenge, however, is that these are rarely granted. We've asked for them multiple times over the years through to the province, rarely granted, but I don't think that should deter you if you have concerns. So again, make yourself aware of your rights under the process. That's really important to do. And I would also add that despite what you might hear, and I'm not suggesting anyone in the room has made this assertion, we hear it, we've heard it from a number of sources, and people who have a misinformed understanding that facilities on port lands aren't subject to provincial environmental rules. They are. So bear that in mind too when you're looking at all of this. I think you've heard tonight clearly we're going through a provincial process. They will be required to secure provincial permits. But because we're going through an environmental assessment, I would also explain to you, any of you who are familiar with the Provincial Environmental Bill of Rights, and if you're not, I'm happy to share some information with you, would know that permits are normally posted there for public comment. So you can provide your input, and if you don't like the decision the ministry makes, you can actually challenge their decision. But because we're going through an environmental assessment process here, it's considered to be equivalent public consultation. So you won't have those same opportunities through the Bill of Rights, unfortunately, to formally provide your input on those permits. But you can certainly, through this process, make sure that you carve out opportunities for that to happen, so that you make direct comments on the air permit that the company will be required to secure and the permit for a waste management site that they'll be required to secure. So the processes, again, it's important to understand them and to make sure that you make your voice heard. And another opportunity I would say is likely to emerge at the municipal level through the requirement for a zoning change. There seems to be some debate over whether that's required, but my sense and what I've heard from the city is that there is a requirement there, and if that's the case, the city will, through their planning committee, hold a statutory public meeting, and you'll all have a very formal opportunity to express your views on whether you support the zoning change to facilitate the use or not. So watch for that. And then finally, the proponent may also be required to undergo a federal environmental assessment. So we're watching that too. And they've already shared information that what they've pulled together for the provincial environmental screening process has gone through to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. And I don't know whether they've provided a response back on the federal assessment requirement. This is federal land. That's why it triggers the federal requirement. But again, another piece to watch for. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to talk further about any of the issues I've raised tonight, but I wanted to provide you with a sense of what we're thinking of right now. And again, we'll continue in our efforts to gather information and ask questions and really encourage all of you to do the same. But thanks very much for the chance to speak with you tonight.
Thank you, Lynda. We're going to take some questions now, if you have some questions of Lynda. If I can do this without tripping anyone.
I don't need a mic. I do need a mic. Hi, Lynda. As you know, I've been involved with you in the environment for a long time. If this is solid waste coming in, then there's going to be piles of stuff. How are they going to...
I come to some questions for Mr. Clark. We'll carry on with questions for Lynda, but if we can hold that very good question, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynda, for being a part of Hamilton. The city wouldn't be as good as it is without you. Oh, okay, sorry. It's unidirectional rather than omnidirectional, right? Okay. I'm going to read a direct quote from a council meeting in January of 2005. It's regarding the Biox facility, which was a new facility going into Hamilton at that point. It unfortunately did not have any, city did not have any real ruling over that because it was Port Authority there. So, but the late Councillor Morelli was against that Biox facility. I'm going to read a direct quote from him. It says, the goal obviously is to operate an efficient harbor as well as to provide access for its people, and we shouldn't add any more industry where we need not to. And so this is an opportunity for me to speak up, for Councillor Morelli to speak up. I think it's an opportunity for you to speak up, regardless of you, if you don't need to approve it, but you do not have jurisdiction over it, and they didn't have jurisdiction when they were for Biox. You're not involved by virtue of an agreement, but if you don't believe in it, you don't need to endorse it or support it. You need not nurture industrial development there. Let me assure you that someday we will begin retrieving that harbor. This could be a start, and I urge you to consider that. I speak not only as the ward councillor, but one who has the overall interest of our citizens of this community at stake. And I know you do too as well. And I think that these people, our community, have the right as much to exposure to this harbor. And I think that in a way that doesn't interfere with what's already there. Thank you for that indulgence. My question would be, we as a city would like the people to have access to that harbor. Biox took that away from people and gave a terrible sight for the people on Oliver Street. What is this facility going to take away from the harbor that our people can't, our citizens can't be enjoying? Thank you.
I think I would go back to, strongly recommending if people feel that there's a need at the community level for an opportunity to have input into the port's holistic vision for the waterfront, that you ask for that. I can provide my perspectives, but I'm a Hamiltonian, I'm not rooted in this community. And I'm not saying that as a cop-out, but I think my strong advice to all of you, and I'll be right there with you leading the charge, is to call for the port to open the doors to some conversation about their land use plans, how they're approaching things, and how you all feel about that. Because I think right now we haven't had that opportunity for so long. I think that's highly problematic on a number of levels. Yeah.
I just want to say something too, that for those people who are making the decisions and stuff, I know that Bernie would say, don't screw it up.
Hi, my question is about air emissions. So on the slide that we saw earlier that talked about air emissions, it said in two places that the emissions that will come from this plant are not significantly worse than the relative emissions around it. But this is a time and place where we're trying to lower the relative emissions. And so am I reading that right, that we're getting into something else that's kind of emitting here, which is not what we want? We want people to be emitting at a lower level.
I think it's safe to say we'd love to see lower pollution levels in this airshed, in neighborhoods closest to the industrial core. And I think this is where it gets challenging. And outside of Hamilton, I talk to people in other communities, and we share these conversations about hotspot airsheds, because we know, and there are others in the room, Lorna and others who've been involved in those conversations with me, with other community members from outside, places like Sarnia, Sault Ste. Marie, where people living very close to industry understand how challenging it is living there because of all of these sources. And one of the problems in Ontario is the way we regulate our air, the way the provincial ministry regulates our air, is it's on a facility by facility basis. So they're not stepping back and looking at, oh, wait a minute, where's Hamilton at? And are we okay to even add a little bit more or not? And I contrast that to the US, where there are attainment and non-attainment zones, where you can have areas that are in a good place and areas that aren't. And there is some, from my understanding of the system, there is some thought given to, can we add more? Or if we add this, what do we need to take away so that we're not, even if it's just a bit, we're not going up, we're heading in the direction that we want to be heading in. And my worry is that right now, there's nothing formal within our regulatory framework that's got us thinking about that piece. There's some conversation at the federal level about air zone management.
I'm all for private investment. I'm all for investment in new technologies. But I'm just wondering if there's any way that we can find out or keep an eye on whether there are tax havens for the investors, and whether we as taxpayers are eventually going to be subsidizing private income from to offshore investors. Does that make sense?
Thank you for the observation. Thank you. Anne?
I guess this isn't really a question for Lynda, but more a comment building on what you've already raised from an operating standpoint. And if it hasn't been done already, I would ask that the project proponents outline what kind of upset conditions might arise as a result of the operation of the plant. When things go well, life is always good. I know that firsthand. But when things don't go so well, what are those conditions? And what are the plans to mitigate them? So if it hasn't been done, certainly a bit of a failure mode assessment would be very appropriate.
Thank you. We'll take two more questions just because of time. We'd like to end pretty much on time if possible. People have various commitments. I see there are some young children here, and those families need to go home on time. And so we'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll talk about going forward. We also will give Mr. Clark an opportunity to respond to some of the earlier questions that were really for him.
Thank you. You were wonderful. Thank you for being here tonight.
It's my pleasure.
Short preface, then two small questions. Put a petition to... Sorry, can we hear me now? Thank you, folks. Got together with a neighborhood group, my street, 3 blocks, 2 blocks east of Sherman. 112 people. 2 people are open-minded to this project, and everybody else has asked me to come here to do what I can to make sure it doesn't happen. We like that lake. We'd like to see it getting better, not worse. Open-minded to the science is one thing, but that location is not something that Ward 3 wants. I don't think it's something that we need. If the science is wonderful and has been around for 200 years, what happened in Las Vegas? I'm reading stories that Las Vegas, the desert, threw them out. A gasification plant was not approved in Las Vegas. The company that was trying to build one there was told to get out of Las Vegas, the desert. This is a nice city. It needs a little bit more help from people like you to make it cleaner and better for families to live in. The question I have for you, is it your colleagues that helped the people of Las Vegas clean up their city? Is it your colleagues that have designed the plan that helps out Toronto, Mississauga, Oakville, and Burlington clean up their lakes? When renovations are done on houses, on the mansions and the lakes in those cities, the land is turned back over. I can walk down a clean path. I can see a clean lake, and I can enjoy that land. Are we making efforts to do that in Hamilton? And was it your colleagues that were able to get that done in the cities mentioned?
Yeah, it likely would have been people from organizations that we're aware of and have links with. We've made some strides in Hamilton, depending on where you are in the waterfront, and I think that's worth acknowledging and celebrating. I'm from the far east end of the city, so I'm still griping about the need for more access there. We've got Windermere Basin, and if you've been down there, it's coming along, but don't go down there after a major storm, because what you see floating down Red Hill Creek isn't so pretty. So we're making improvements where we can, but again, I think one thing I'm amazed by is how many people are engaged in this neighborhood. So your voice is growing, when maybe, I think it's fair to say 10 years ago, you weren't coming together and having conversations the way that you are now. So now is a really good time to really engage in dialogue about what you want to see happen here. I really encourage you to do that. Yeah. Okay.
We'll take our last question.
My question would be with regards to environmental impact on storage, like when the waste is being stored, how long is it being stored? And since we're not ruling out toxic waste, how safe, or how could there be an impact on the community if it's stored for any length of time? Like, that would be my question. I don't know if I should direct it to you or to Mr. Clark.
I think to Mr. Clark, but again, I would say oftentimes those kinds of details will come out in the permits as well. So it's really important, I think, for people to pay attention to what the ministry imposes as far as requirements for how much waste can come in on a given day, how it needs to be stored. But I'm sure, I think it's safe to say the framework, if the permits do go through, if the approvals go through, that there's a standard framework that would set out precautions and actions that need to be taken to control. But again, in my experience, it never hurts to get involved. I think what I've learned is that if community weighs in and says, we want the bar set up here, not down here, that can have a huge impact on how permits look at the end of the day. If the ministry, I always tell people, squeaky wheel gets the oil with the ministry, and there's a lot of truth in that. I think largely because they're just so under-resourced and overwhelmed. If they hear from a lot of people and you tell them, this is what you want to see happen, that's going to, if the switchboard is lighting up at the ministry, that's going to get action from them. They're going to pay attention to what your concerns are. So I think you can all have a huge impact on, if the proposal goes forward, making sure that there are as many provisions in place to protect you and the environment as possible. So that would be my strong message to you going forward, is pay attention, and raise the questions and get involved in the process. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lynda, for coming this evening and sharing your thoughts and taking questions. We appreciate it very much. I know there was just some clapping here a minute ago, but could we please give Lynda another warm thank you. Some of the questions were not really directed to Lynda, and I wonder if Mr. Clark would like to take just a few moments to respond to some of those, if you'd like to, sir.
Sure. Thank you. I think we should have changed the order around. Because Dr. Lukasik, as I mentioned in my presentation, I'm sure she's going to have a lot of good questions, and she does. She always does. And we'll continue to address all of them, as I have mentioned to you. I guarantee we'll address all of them. I can do that over the next week nonstop, because there are a lot of questions here. I will pick out a couple. Tax havens. Who did the tax haven question? We are a private equity fund, so our goal is to get in and get out, which means we're looking for partners here in Ontario, in Hamilton, to transfer this technology over to. We're not operators. We're not the developer. We want to get in and get out. We want to have the ability of taking this technology to a lot of different places, a lot of different countries, a lot of different wherevers. So we're currently working with several Ontario entities right now to become partners with us, with the stated goal money away out of the country. The goal is to get this technology here and to transfer it
to anybody here in Ontario that's going to work with us. That was one. Second was upset conditions. I've worked in plants all my life. This is what I do. I used to do all kinds of strange and wonderful. I work. Pardon? No, this is what I'm trying to explain to you, my background first, before I get to Ward 3. This gentleman right here.
Could we just take questions that we already have, please? Not questions from the audience at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. My particular background is I used to do death tests in every single system that I have. That's my goal, is to figure out what you described as upset conditions, to find out where the failure mode is. That's what my background is, in addition to technology development. I do that. I compare this to every single other commercial operating plant in the world, different type of plants. The thing that I mentioned that you may not have picked up on is that this plant operates at atmospheric conditions. It operates like this. There's no high pressure. There's no high pressure lines. There's very simple. The only pressure, really the basic pressure, is the in the first building that receives the fuel. There's a negative waste. There's a negative pressure so that nothing escapes into the atmosphere, as far as that's concerned. But from a safety standpoint, and as Dr. Lukasik has mentioned in DNO, Design Operations Report, all this information is going to be spelled out. But it is a very safe environment, probably the most benign that you can think of, because it operates at atmospheric conditions. Storage, there is a question on storage. The first thing is we're trying not to do any MSW, because that's where the bulk of your issues are, bulk of the issues that I see in storage. Anyway, in direct answer, we have a big building with negative pressure that can have storage. The only thing that we want to do, and this is what's written in our reports, and by the way, this gentleman here is Gordon Roosing. He is the representative from Conestoga Rovers and Associates that's working with us on our permitting application. He is the air shed expert. So when we get done, if you have any specific questions, we can work with Gordon on that. But 3-day supply. We're looking at 3 days. And that's to be able to work through a weekend without having trucks coming in on a weekend, or you like to, or on a holiday. But we're looking for a 3-day supply in order to make sure that you don't have all these extra trucks coming in and out. I can't hear you.
I think we're going to have to be careful because of our closing time, which was 9 o'clock. And
First you said they were going to use the lakes, and lakes, they are huge. Huge tonnage. So it would be more than 3 days supply, I'm sure, so.
No, I'm working on it. It was brought up along with that is toxic waste. As mentioned, this permit does not allow that. There may be discussions. I think Dr. Lukasik, when I talked to her, we were in many different areas here in Ontario, and when they learned of the technology, they said, come tell us about the technology. So we did. We came to talk to them, and it has the technical capability of doing that. That's not in the plans for this location. Does it have the capability of doing it? Yes. Technically, it can. It can handle random reef, but that's not, there you already have a plan going on there for capping and whatever else. It's not in the direction we're going, and it's not been from the beginning, and it's not in our permit application. Do I have time for more? Okay. I really do wish we had the opportunity of reversing it, but these questions are all written down. A lot of them are ongoing questions.
You'd be more than welcome. The planning team is resident-led, so it all depends on who is interested in being involved in things and what they would like to do together. And we just want to follow our values, which are heavily around respect and inclusiveness and stewardship and being resident-led. And I don't remember them all off the top of my head. David probably does. Which ones am I missing, David? Utmost, thank you, thank you. So we want to work together on things that are important to this neighborhood, and we want to work together in ways that are positive. And I just want to say that I think all of you can be proud of each other as to the way that this meeting unfolded. You're a wonderful group of neighbors, and together we can do very much. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. Thank you to Lynda and to Bob for their presentations and their patient answering of questions. And we wish you all a wonderful evening and a great life here in our neighborhood.